Draft physics video, I think. Yeah, why not? Yeah, I could do some other kind of video, but I think that's where the camera will stay. That's what I'll do anyway. Comments, I guess. I want to get on to something other than the dissident science guy who has the other channels, the one with his father, with the particle guru. He posted a couple of new videos on this particle theory they have, and it just isn't. Frankly, I don't see any hope of it working because it's I just from experience over the last whatever 7 years or however long it's been, 5, 6, whatever. There's lots of arguments they're going to have to deal with that I don't think their theory is going to hold up to. And the first one is any particle theory has got to do the Lesage thing. It's got to get over the problem of the particles field creating a friction to motion, and so you have to explain inertia before you explain anything else. Essentially, you're going to have to find explanations for how matter navigates fields. Wrong way to say it. Fields of force is the way to say it, but I mean, how it navigates the stuff in the universe. Let's say, not the empty space. Anyway, so I want to get to that. But it's so inspecific that it's almost hard to argue something that isn't really developed yet. Anyway, but we'll argue it. So these are just some old comments. Some Petros Adamorphous guy. Where do you get electricity flowing at the speed of light from? Question mark. Who's claiming this except nobody ever? Look, I played the guy. This is regarding the electric universe people. I played his video. Clearly, if I'm responding to something he said, he clearly indicated there was some lack of the speed limit for this thing called electricity. And so I don't know where you're getting your offense from. I mean, I played his video. If I said something, I said it in response to what he said, idiot. Alright, so, and then so his next comment was something about me blocking him, which I don't really understand since he's still posting. I guess I triggered you and hurt your precious feelings by posting contradicting facts here and there. I don't know what facts those would have been, but no, I don't recall any. Didn't I? So you blocked me. So why are you still posting if I blocked you? Who'd I block? Anyway, I was always respectful and constructive. I don't think you were. But if you're crazy, then I'll let you be. Thank you. Anyway, I mean, I don't see the constructive part you're doing, so I don't see any loss. I'm not going to miss you. Yeah, that's the truth of it. Anything you're right about is drowned in the things you are willfully clueless about. Like what? ... he puts. Like what? You're God? Just fuck off. Alright, Robert Gage Jr. I had hopes of becoming enlightened in some way by viewing this 1 hour long video which purported to shoot down and expose. Frankly, he has those in quotes. Shoot down and expose. I would never even use that kind of language. So obviously you're not quoting anything I promised, idiot. The extremely brilliant and knowledgeable man, Ken Wheeler. He's also pretty fat. Anyway, however, extremely fat. However, what I actually found here was an ugly foul mouth, which is hilarious considering Ken Wheeler, both his foul mouth in terms of he's always speaking ill of the dead. And yes, his rhetoric is quite ugly. And then he says transvestite looking. And again, this is just hilarious. A big fat, bald, tattooed guy who does a lot of gay stuff. A lot of hey girl and snaps his fingers and stuff. Stuff that I just can't barely get up enough queer energy to even mimic. It's so gay. And you're going to talk about somebody else being a transvestite. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, you know, you can't write misses as bad as that. I mean, it's just such a brilliant fail. Bravo. Fantastic fail. Exceedingly agitated. Yes, that's right. And angry. Right. So this is Ken Wheeler's called The Angry Photographer, which is also, again, how can you miss so bad? Anyway, I'm quite certain gay man. Oh, so this is again, and he's going to do that relative to Ken Wheeler, who, frankly, I even think he admitted in some places, or some, places where he is gay, which is hilarious. Having an enormous chip on his shoulder against the very informative Ken Wheeler. Boy, you really do love butt fucking, don't you? So we know who's, the gay guy in this whole conversation. This odd person spent the entire hour endlessly bouncing completely spasticality from one random issue to another. Well, that's how Ken's videos are. You can't play one and respond to it without ending up bouncing all over the place because Ken doesn't stay on one subject ever. Let's see, with entire discord. Yes. Complimenting the, again, potty mouth of Ken Wheeler. He never even once said a single thing indicating that Ken Wheeler, the angry photographer, well, at least you recognize he's angry, had ever been dishonest in any way whatsoever. Well, that's been proven in other videos, how he posted images where he took the copyright out of the images and, pretended they were his, and he's done all kinds of little bullshitties. But I remember, what was his, the accusation isn't, well, clearly in some of his videos he's being dishonest, like when he was pressing the plastic bottle against the refrigerator, pretending that the dimple popping back up had something to do with some kind of physical force of nature was just such bullshit. But anyway, the author of this video is extremely nasty, rude, continually uses extremely foul language. What's extremely foul language? I mean, compared to Ken Wheeler, he calls people knuckle draggers, just for not believing what he believes. Anyway, throughout this video, he's very clearly has psychiatric issues and should seek professional counseling for his serious problems. Well, again, I'm rubber, you're glue, silly person, go away. So anyway, let's see. Thanks for pointing me to TA. I guess that's Theora Apocalypse. We love you for that. Smiley face. I don't even know what that means. DS, we love you. Well, I don't really want all that kind of... I mean, it's not useful commentary, so I'll just delete that kind of mush. Anyway, Peter Yank. Elwitz. Anyway, I hope you're doing well despite all the bigots. Sometimes on Hothla Fuck's channel, that's not very nice language, as does Hothla thinks space-time is doomed, and it's hilarious to think that if it were, Theora or anyone else saying that shit would be dismissed as a crackpot. Yes, well, it is, Hothla days, whatever that whole bullshit is, I don't understand. 1 minute saying, I'm pretty sure, general relativity is a dead theory, and the next minute saying, but it's the most proven theory in the history of mankind. Anyway, contortionist X, IX, Vsauce, new video about gravity and such. I post a link to a video. It's okay, it just does the geometry parlor trick kind of bullshit about Hafladay's whole the math tells the planets what to do kind of stuff, and so it just uses I don't know how to, there's implications to spherical geometry, as it's called, and and some of those you can notice with just simple things like just putting a flat piece of paper on a on a sphere, and you'll see that you can't do it without it crinkling. There's rules, and it doesn't really mean planets are figuring that out. So anyway, but I'm not going to go into that now. Let's see, exactly, I agree 100%. As soon as somebody says they agree 100%, I know I'm in trouble. I guess they told you, blah, 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 close to the, there are so many facets to this. Who are these people? Anyone who claims to be intellectual ought to have an open mind and consider everything. That's not true. Okay. They give several examples of empirical evidence that light is how they describe it. They do? Like what? Yet this is just theory. Yes, you seem to run up against a religion. When I see these people in action, it's remarkable how they accomplish anything. It's remarkable if you ever get to a point. A value. I understand they don't like students asking homework questions. So anyway, this was the Stack Exchange thing. I didn't ask a question at Stack Exchange. I solicited participation in an argument, and they didn't want to do any of that. It's that simple. Anyway, so some guy called Ahum Sivia. Your perception about Tesla is not quite right, my friend. Well, we're not really friends, and this beginning isn't going to make that really possible either. You speak a lot about the death ray and say he even not made it. Yeah, that's right, because that's the truth. He did make it. Where do you have evidence of that? Where? Do you have it anywhere? Do you have any source for that at all? You just made that up. Anyway, and wrote it down. You have absolutely no evidence of that either. So, you think he had a working death ray and the Russians wouldn't buy it. You really think so? I think you're an idiot. Yeah, a big idiot. It's really idiotic. Anyway, wrote it down, and it was one of the biggest mistakes he ever made, regretting that he put it on paper. How do you know any of that? Where did you hear that from? While he was living in the hotel for the last 20 years of his life. His place was burned. What place? His hotel room? His hotel room was never burned. And a lot of his work and materials were destroyed. No, that was his own place, and he almost burned it down many times because it was playing with huge voltages. Duh. Oh man, these people are just amazing. Tesla never claimed anybody burned down any of his buildings. He lived his life trying to make people live life better. No, he didn't do that. He tried to make a death ray. He tried to sell the idea that I'll create the ultimate weapon and somehow sell it to the Russians, and that'll create world peace. I mean, he didn't have any strategy that you could call intelligent or reasonable. Einstein himself found him a great competitor. No evidence of that. Einstein hated Tesla, but Einstein was a polite man and would never say anything like, Tesla is a buffoon. So instead, Einstein would say things like, when somebody asked him, Mr. Einstein, what's it like to be the smartest man in the world? He would say things like, go ask Mr. Tesla. Because Mr. Tesla thought he was the smartest man in the world, you see. And he was always bragging about it. So you don't even understand reality here at all. Tesla was mocked by intellectuals because he was not he wasn't one. Pretty simply, let's see. He lived a life better. That's okay. I find your video a bit inappropriate. Ooh, that's scary. Because you are doing nothing else but making insults, and I am very sorry, but I think Jimmy just want to create a platform for people to talk about things not ordinary. You mean things not related to reality. You mean made up facts about a fake superhero that you silly people have created. Tesla was not the man you think he was. He never claimed to say the truth. Well, isn't that brilliant? He never claimed to say the truth. So he's making videos talking about a real character in real history, and he's not obligated to tell the truth. Oh, okay. Yes, you really do live by a different standard than me. You're a silly person. I saw all his vids and they are all open to discussion. Who cares? I don't know what discussion. Actually, I don't see anything in the comment section myself, but whatever. I am sorry, but you still have a lot to learn in this live. Like everyone off us, that is being lied to. Well, again, I don't think you can tell the difference. If you would start with love yourself, maybe you can start loving others. Well, again, I really, you're another guy who just fails so badly. I mean, to accuse me of being somebody who's not vain or who has some problem loving myself, that's just so fucking silly. I mean, you just can't. I mean, I'm overtly, almost aggressively, whatever that would be, vain. I will look into a couple other videos you made. Maybe we can start a discussion. Well, I'm not going to discuss stuff based on stuff that's unsourced. So get your sources prepared. Show where you can prove that Tesla made a death ray. And then we can talk. But otherwise, not going to happen. I hope to be surprised. I don't care. I must because you apparently know the answer to everything. Yes. At least you got that part right. Alright, so delete. Anyway, so let's see, that's a compliment. You don't like those. We don't bother with compliments. Why is it that the scroll doesn't scroll properly? I just don't know what that is. A little scrolling wheel does all kinds of bouncing. Anyway, this video, are you talking about single phase 240 volts AC or three phase 240 volts AC? Yeah, three phase is more complicated, so that's not what I'm really talking about. Let's see how to separate the two. But it's not single phase 240, so I don't think I don't think anyone would describe it that way. But anyway, yeah, three phase is a that's they use it for a couple of different things, but you have to do the transformers different to get three phase, and it just kind of like it's a it's a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 kind of push for a motor kind of thing. So it's more efficient, but it's less efficient in the sense of producing it's less efficient. So, yeah, I just don't know what applications they use three phase for, frankly, off the top of my head. Might be good for when you want to float something, over an two electric fields and have them create a magnetic fields that are uncomplementary. But yeah, I don't know what else it could be used for. Well, anyway, so I'll think on that. But yeah, I was just talking about two phase. Let's see. I really used to enjoy Ken's. I mean, it's three wire. Two phase. I don't know how else to say that. Anyway, I really used to enjoy Ken's videos on camera lenses as he had different angles on things compared to other photography channels. However, his physics videos are complete nonsense to me, and I never understood their popularity or where the legions of people lapping up came from, nor why they all seemed to be so grateful to him. It's like the life of Brian, with everyone looking for the next Messiah and willing to believe anything. Well, yeah, apparently all you have to do is say, well, I speak a couple of different languages, and I can do this and I can do that, and therefore I am all-powerful, and so I'll tell you the truth about magnets. I guess you can get away with it because everybody's an idiot. It's almost worth having his videos out there just for you to pull them apart, though. I learned more about physics listening to you correct him and reducing his bizarre vocabulary down to simple terms. Not to mention the fact that it is entertaining to listen to you do it. Please continue to do so. Some of us are grateful for your videos too. I appreciate it, but yeah, like I said, I'm really not here to educate, but it's, if I can do it, great. really here just to get my chance to defend the truth I'm arguing, which is Eureka, I found it, you know. You know, and I'm just not going to get that chance, I guess. Hi Gary, hope you are well. I know this is a little off topic, but just had a thought. This is Michael Falwell. I understand the inverse square law applies to, say, light sources or heat sources or magnetic sources or gravity in the conventional sense. Yes, it affects everything. It creates spherical geometry as output. So from point of origin of source, radiating out becomes exponentially weaker as it spreads out over a larger area. Yeah, well, it's really just the divergence thing. So you could think of it as a cone or triangle, even, to make the geometry even simpler. You know, but anyway, it's divergence. All right, spreads out over a larger area, but I wanted to ask, if gravity is an external force of pressure, how would the law be applied, as the source would no longer be a source point, but already be an enlarged spread out force? Well, that's exactly the point. That's why it's push instead of pull. See, a light bulb is doing the exact opposite. It's showing you what it would look like if you ran it in reverse, you know, in a sense. But it's really not. So I guess it's time for a drawing of some kind. That's just incidental, actually. The similarity is only in appearance. But it really has to do with this idea of the two halves to the sphere. And what you're really talking about is gravity is a creation of a depth of stuff blocking. You know, so it's really about how long these diameter lines are, right? And so if you could think about them as arrows, you could only do, if you just drew them, you know, from side to side. Obviously, I haven't created a very good center to this circle, so I'm going to have to screw up my own drawing. But the idea would be is all these diameters. Okay, so just think about the ones going from any place that bisect or hit this circle. All right. And create a diameter. And so you'll have just as many coming out of this side as you will this side. So those two kind of balance each other out as opposites. You know, and then you have the one in the middle. And so it all balances into this idea of a force in the middle, straight down. But that's only incidental to the balance of the sphere, the symmetry. Yeah, symmetry, that's the word I was looking for. So it's just the symmetry that creates the illusion of a center of gravity. There's not really a center of gravity beyond the fact that there's a point where you have equal amounts of matter on both sides, and therefore you don't have any gravity in this very middle, you could say. You know, and then you have the maximum gravity in the diameter. So, you know, obviously at any point you're standing on, there's a diameter, so you're under the maximum amount of gravity. But that's the maximum, is just the thickness. And it really just has to do with the thickness relative to your position. So if you were somebody on another planet, and that planet was close enough to the Earth, you would have to measure the thickness of this versus the thickness of this, and just counting the mass part, not the empty space part. And you'd have to minus those two. So, you know, the one would subtract from this side, so you could say this would be the subtraction, and all you'd have left over is this gravity. So you'd be pulled by a force as strong as just a circle that big, kind of a thing. Yeah, that wasn't a great explanation, but it really is a blocking force in the sense of the shadow makes the description of how it works. So if you think of it as shadow as being an absence of what? Yeah, I'm just trying, you know, it would be the absence of pressure, something hitting something. So then the other side doesn't have the absence. But you have to think about it in terms of there was light around everything, except you had the light bulbs. You had light shining on all of these surfaces from all of these angles. And then you could sort of appreciate that wherever a shadow is created, like this light gets blocked, then you'd know that this wasn't getting hit, and therefore there was more light coming over here and pushing them together. I don't know how. It's just, but the idea of the center of gravity isn't a real thing. Let's see, there's another way to say that. It's just a consequence that there's always the other half of the, it's the halfway point. So it's not really a center, it's just the halfway point between the mass. It's the even part. You're balanced. If you're only a quarter deep into the earth, then you have 3/4 and 1/4, so there's no balance. It's just about symmetry. So the center is where the symmetry is. So there's balance, so there's a 0 point. But it's completely incidental. It doesn't do anything to create that. It's just a consequence of that drawing I've shown so many times. It's just a consequence of this even force coming from all angles. And that's just the consequence of it. Even though this force can go right through, whatever portion of it gets absorbed as an acceleration, it's still going to create a point in the middle that's the center of gravity. I don't like the way I said that exactly, but you'll have to do. It's probably some better analogy to use. I just didn't think of it. So maybe next time. Let's see. Did you ever manage a phone soliciting company in the Midwest? So this is just such a stupid comment. So I think we'll just block this guy. I don't know. I think I worked part-time for you once. You mentioned you were on a list to go to on the space shuttle at that time. Yeah, I don't know if I believe any of that story, but I don't even understand the point of it. I mean, it just can't be something called a real post. So if it's a joke, I don't really, it's just not even close to funny. I mean, not even close. Anyway, so Adrian Foley. All of a sudden, glass and water have lattice structure. Oh, I don't. Did I say it was all of a sudden? I don't think so. DraftScience, you brilliant madman. You did it again. So I guess he's being sarcastic. But what's the point of your argument? There's reasons why things are transparent, right? And they're different for each thing, I would think. But even the atmosphere thing, the oxygen, even when it's a liquid, is clear. Nitrogen, even when it's a liquid, is clear. So the gases in the atmosphere are clear, transparent, translucent, whatever. And that's a property. Clearly, it's a chemical property. And it also seems kind of clear that there's a structure to that, where simple things can ruin it, like scratching the glass or heating the water. Doing things that create enough rapid movement, then you'll distort the image quality. So there's clearly something between the atoms, or the creation of molecules, the clumping factor. And clearly glass does the clumping in crystals, and when water freezes, it certainly does it in crystals. So whatever. You don't get it? Fine. Fuck you. I think it's a subject that's ripe for more detailed analysis and such. So anyway, so Fractal Woman. So I did go to her channel, look at a couple of videos. So she has a couple with the ferrocell. And they're quite useful because she was making her own. And so there are a couple of different varieties, and you see different things the way it moves. And what I've noticed, I mean, I probably should play some of the videos. I don't know if I have any of them loaded. Yeah, here's one. Okay, so this is an image from one of her videos, and you can, it's kind of crude, but these are the lines. And so what happens is that each one of these is an arc that's, has a focus one of the LED lights. So every time you see one of these lines, each one is created by an independent LED light, and it's always this circle. Now, I don't know exactly what the circle is a reflection of yet, and it's not always centered, so that's another thing to figure out. But that's, so far, that's what I've noticed. Okay, so it's a green LED here, a green LED here, a green LED here. So each one of these arcs was created that way. Now, when they cross, you can see here when a red one crosses a green one, it's orange there, or almost yellow, and right there. So that's an indication of that the light is being mixed after it was created. Right. So anyway, it's helpful to, number one, first to get that, and then I just have to figure out what's creating the arcs. So the ones that have very complex patterns are being created because there's lots of LEDs very close together, and so this, it's lots of light sources, and the light sources are creating the lines. Now, why they're bent is the thing to be figured out yet. I have yet to sufficiently opine an explanation, because I haven't seen it done with like a square piece of glass or something. But I don't think that would matter because they never go far enough out, and they're not the same arc as the glass. So I don't know exactly what that is. But the clear is equidistant from the LED, which I don't see how that could be terribly significant either. But anyway, to be figured out. Alright, so anyway, Fractal Woman says, so this is how I see light propagating through transparent materials like water. Light propagates through ether. Well, I'm sorry, I mean, just show me some of that. Show me a glass of ether. And sound propagates through matter. Alright, sound does not propagate through ether, and light does not propagate through matter. Well, I just don't know how that's going to work, because obviously it propagates through glass, and glass is matter, but whatever. For example, light cannot propagate through a brick wall, and sound cannot propagate through empty space. Yes, alright, I mean, you're going to use the word propagate, so you're using it in the sense of you're talking about a vibration through a medium as propagation, where I would just say, if I throw that, I propagated it through the medium. Okay, but it was certainly an it that went through the medium. There was no, the medium really didn't have to give its permission or to help in any way. The thing figured it out. So anyway, but what about transparent materials like glass? Well, if light can propagate through a material, then there must be some ether in the space between the atoms in the material. Well, by your theory. And again, there are very dense materials that can be transparent, like a diamond or something. Well, I don't know how dense it is, actually. They're not that heavy. I never weighed them, so I really don't know. It is well known that light propagates slower through material media. Transparent mediums, right. But why? Well, that was the whole point of the video, actually. I say it is because ether is rarefied, using Ken words, in material media. I think it's because ether is, what, solidified? I don't know. In sound theory, sound waves travel slower through rarefied air, for example. Well, they travel even slower in water. This is because the elastic properties of the rarefied material is much lower in the rarefied material. Yeah, so it could just be the distance between the molecules, could be a lot of things. In a similar manner, the elastic properties of the ether be much lower in a transparent medium such as glass. So again, this idea of whatever this ether is, filling the spaces between atoms, and that somehow your light is just going to go between the atoms, just doesn't make much sense to me, sorry. It's have to go through the atoms, but anyway, light can still propagate but much slower. In other words, there is very little difference between the way light propagates and the way sound propagates. Well, I'd say there's absolutely nothing similar in the manner in which they propagate. Sound clearly is vibrating atoms. Light is not vibrating ether. There are more similarities than difference, in my humble opinion. Right, in my opinion, there's more differences than similarities. The similarities are only superficial, and any rigorous viewing of how light travels will display that it is not medium dependent. But anyway, see my paper on this very subject on ResearchGate. I don't know what ResearchGate doesn't sound very good, but whatever. A medium for the propagation of light revisited. Okay, well, that might be interesting just to see what was written, but I'm not sure. I don't have much confidence. I just think it's just wrong-headed, this making up the ether thing, but whatever. Alright, then she said another comment on the same video. Power, which has units, joules per second, is loss of energy, which has units, joules, and loss of energy, power, joules per second, is capable of generating a force, which has units of momentum per second. Both power, joules per second, and force, p's per second, are loss of inertia. Again, it's loss of inertia is by Ken's definition loss of potential. What's the point? Well, you could say explosion, you could say expansion, you could use some word for the event of converting matter into force, but to call it loss of inertia is kind of silly. Only power and force are able to create change. So again, power is not, in my opinion, a useful word. Force is. But anyway, if inertia is resistance to change, then loss of inertia. If inertia is resistance to change, well, that's another definition, but that's not Ken's definition. His definition is potential. When loss of inertia is technically change can only happen over time. Thus, the units of loss of inertia is 1 per second. The units of force is momentum times loss of inertia. The conversion, I suppose. The units of power is energy, loss of inertia. Ken misspoke when he said loss of power. He meant loss of energy. Oh, well, anyway, that seems like a difference without a difference. Power is release of energy. Whatever. I don't know if there's anything worth arguing about all that mush. Clearly we describe something as having energy merely because it does something we describe as having energy. It moves. I don't know if there's much else to say. Anyway, centripetal and centrifugal are incommensurate principles. So she's just using his silly language. Centripetal counter spiral, its vector points inward contraction, and centrifugal is spiral, its vector points outward expansion. So somehow she's trying to argue that clockwise and counterclockwise, somehow one goes in and one goes out. Yet there's no description of exactly how that takes place, and no description of how both can be both. you know, you can spin the tornado either way, so to speak, and then it's still going to suck in. So which way it's turning doesn't really have anything to do with this mush. This is how I see it. Who cares? Anyway, ground is not average pressure. Yes, it is. It is the lowest pressure. Well, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just not true. The solidest ground there is, the ground, okay, outside, isn't the lowest negative pressure. You can make a minus voltage to that ground voltage, and you can make a plus voltage to that ground voltage. So it's just impossible to say it's the lowest pressure. And the pressure is the voltage. It is the will of the electrons, how close they are packed together. The closer packed together they are, the more they want to get apart. So that's the electric pressure we're talking about, is the pressure between the electrons. The more pressure between the electrons, the more potential force, the more potential for some loss of inertia to happen. It is lowest pressure. Negative voltage and positive voltage both correspond to high pressure. That's just wrong. Ground counter space, on the other hand, corresponds to low pressure. Well, I'm just saying you can't do it that way. It doesn't. It's coherently just wrong. You're not understanding voltage. I mean, clearly the difference between the plus and the minus sign is the fact of the direction of the electrons. One of them has a lack of, and one of them has too many of. So they're opposite conditions. And you can't say the ground is a more negative or more positive. It's not possible. Both positive and negative voltages represent a pressure of some kind. Well, it's a pressure of one kind, not some kind, of one kind of thing, and that is the pressure of the electrons. Right? Question mark. If negative voltage doesn't represent pressure of some kind, then what is it? That's exactly the point. It represents the empty, where the plus represents the too much. Now, obviously, it's the other way around, because plus and minus were appropriated the wrong way. So the minus actually means too many electrons. The plus means very few electrons, and it would be relative to ground. That's what the too much and too little would be relative to. But those are the two opposites. They're definitely the poles. So you can't say you have a third pole called ground. You just don't. The ground is the middle of the magnet. It's the dead space. If negative voltage doesn't represent pressure of some kind, okay, this is why we need to ground things. All pressure mediation, she really just is she's just bought into this crap, causes a move towards low pressure. So again, it's clearly going to move towards low pressure, but ground isn't the lowest pressure. So it's going to move faster towards the negative than it's going to, well, to the positive, to be accurate. The electrons are going to move to the positive pole much faster than they'll move to the ground. The pressure will be stronger. This is why we need to ground things. Well, actually, you don't need to ground anything in simple circuits where you just have plus and minus. You can just make either one of those two things the ground if you choose. So the only time ground comes up is when you need to have positive and negative voltages. To relieve unwanted pressure, stray voltages. I don't know what stray voltage would be. I'm pretty sure Ken sees it this way too. Well, I'm just saying your explanation of ground being more negative or more positive is just wrong. He just isn't good at articulating it. Hilarious. Here you are using his vocabulary and you complain about how he can't articulate. You're not going to be able to do it either if you keep using this kind of crappy language. So anyway, yeah, that should be it for the comments. Now, should I go off to dissident science stuff? My brain seems tired. Yeah, doesn't seem like much of an excuse, Gary. Come on, you can do it. Anyway, I'll start with some of it. So there were 4 new videos. 2 gravities, push-pull, the particle guru explains LIGO, well, forget that one, and particle to particle interactions. Alright, well this is probably a good image just to play with for a second. So, they only have these 3 particles. Something called a nucleon. So they say the proton, I guess there's no point in showing that image because it's screwed up anyway. I mean the second gravity is just ludicrous. Anyway, so they're saying that protons and neutrons are the same thing, and they're going to call them this nucleon thing. I don't know why they would deny the existence of particles that have obviously different properties. I mean, neutrons are neutral, and protons are not neutrally charged. So then you have to account for their behavioral differences, and if they're going to be the same thing, you're going to have to explain why they don't behave the same. So that really doesn't work. Alright, then everything else is G1 and G2 particles. So you have this nucleon, which is the nucleus particles, protons and neutrons. And then you have these G1s that are electrons and photons. Somehow they're both the same particle. Now clearly there's a relationship between electrons and photons, and clearly photons in forms that we don't see clearly are produced by the whole electromagnetic spectrum. Essentially is elements of it are produced by atoms. Atoms have to produce radio waves. Everything has to produce these things that are real phenomenon, and they do it in some manner. But the idea that photons and electrons are the same thing gets into all kinds of junk, because you're going to have to explain why, when they're in the form of an electron, whatever that form is, they behave fundamentally differently than they behave when they're free, in terms of how they interact with things like protons. And so I'm going to say good luck with that. See, somehow they're going to do away with charge in this theory, and I just don't see how you can possibly do that and then ever explain the strong and weak forces, magnetism, and it's just not going to happen. It's too fundamental a concept, polarization. So anyway, alright, so they're doing the particle gravity thing, which is good. Gravity's a push force. So a couple of videos just on the subject of push and how it's not a pull universe. There, bravo for that. And so he has this simplistic model of gravity, just the arrows going in, which is correct. But he doesn't really talk about how the gravity is the shadowing effect, and certainly the Lesage kind of elements of it. And you certainly do have to explain how something travels through a medium of particles, and so there's no explanation for any of that. So what he's arguing, though, is that when light diffracts through a substance, the angle changes. When you're transitioning between substances, there's always this angle change or diffraction. And he says that's being created by these G2 particles that are somehow pushing the light to go crooked. So the G2 particles are like gravity for the G1 particles. All right, but he doesn't go as bad as his son does, Dave. When it comes to talking about any kind of infinite regression, he doesn't really imply any infinite regression. So you just have these two, and the problem is the second gravity, the G2s, aren't doing that center of gravity thing, so the shadow thing wouldn't work at all. Um, because it doesn't line up on centers. You see, these lines all go straight across here. There's no center of gravity, so you can't really call it gravity when there's no center of gravity. When it doesn't obey the obligations of the material structure, the fact of the shape. Like I said, the geometry doesn't have to be round. It's like any symmetrical geometry is going to create a center of gravity. So whether it's a rectangle or a square, it doesn't matter. As long as it's symmetrical, it's going to create a center of gravity. So got to explain how that's possible. Alright, then the particle-to-particle interactions, I can't remember. He does think the G2s move the speed of light squared for some reason, so that would be not instantaneous, but pretty damn close. And there's no evidence of anything like that. He suggests that it's possible to, have instantaneous communication at great distances, and none of that. There's no indication of any of that stuff, and there would be a consequence. Just as theoretically gravity waves are created and they move across the universe and send signals, there would be evidence of this G2 signaling associated. It would be affecting electrons and photons at a distance and creating lots of spooky action. And there's no evidence of any of that. So what else did he say? Oh yeah, in the end of the one video, he's I was surprised. He says something like, Einstein was right that gravity bends light, but he just thinks it's G2 gravity. And that's just going to be a huge miss. So anyway, there's just nothing in here yet. There's just not quite enough detail to really pick it apart. But there's going to be lots of questions to ask. First, what experiments indicate any of this stuff is true, but just you have to answer the simple ones, the 300-year-old questions of Lesage gravity. You have to still answer those problems. So you have to explain how you get rid of the thermodynamic problem of a external force that moves something, affects it, and then you have to explain how it doesn't affect it when it's got velocity through it. So when something has velocity through it, the rain, Feynman's raindrop analogy, you still have to deal with it. Why doesn't the force consume the velocity of anything moving through it? Because it hits more stuff going in the direction it's moving than the stuff behind it, obviously. Alright, that's probably enough. So yeah, I didn't do a great job. I wasn't very articulate in this video, but whatever. Shit happens and stuff. So you'll have to wait till next time. And I really want to do some videos on my own theory, which I haven't been able to do lately just because I've been doing all this other side stuff. But we'll see how that goes too. Just doing some more, I think the important thing is the vocabulary and just going over that and over that. Just to get this so it's understood. And why it is so necessary to have this the polarization in the origin particles. The most fundamental particles need it's got to start in the beginning, and you can't just make it show up later on. So that's so it really does show a huge distinction between their particle model and mine, in that mine has polarization right at the roots, because frankly it's what makes it all happen. But anyway, until the next time.